Namo Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Shrinvatam Swakata Krishna Punyashravana Kirtana Hridyantasto Hyapadrani Vidunoti Suhritsatam Nashtaprayesha Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhaktir Bhavatir Naishtiki. I offer my respectful obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord, who are exactly like desire trees, capable of satisfying the desires of all living entities, and who are naturally very compassionate to the fallen conditioned souls. I offer my respectful obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva. Before reciting the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the Personality of Godhead, Narayan, unto Nara Narayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. Sri Krishna, the Personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma, super soul in everyone's heart, and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who has developed the urge to hear his message, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. By regular attendance in classes on the Bhagavatam and by rendering of service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is almost completely destroyed, and loving service unto the Personality of Godhead, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. Today we're reading from the first canto, Creation, Chapter 10, Departure of Lord Krishna for Dwarka, verse 6, if I'm not mistaken. So I'll repeat the verse 3 times and then have an opportunity to hear you all repeat it as well. Nadhayo vyadaya klesha daiva bhutatma hetava ajata shatru abhavan jantunam ranjikar hichit. Nadhayo vyadaya klesha daiva bhutatma hetava ajata shatrau abhavan jantunam ragni karhichit. Nadhayo vyadaya klesha daiva bhutatma hetava ajata shatrau abhavan jantunam ragni karhichit.
Nadhayo vyadha klesha daiva bhutatma hetavah ajata shatrava bhavan jantunam rajni karhichit.
Thank you, Prabhuji.
Nadayo vyadaya klesha daiva bhutatma hetavah ajata shatrava bhavan jantunam ragni karhichit. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Nadayo vyadaya bhutatma hetavaha ajata shatru abhavan janatam rajni kar.
Thank you, Prabhu. Mataji.
Sorry, Prabhu. Yeah. Nadayo vyadaha klesha dhaiva bhutatma hetavaha ajata shatrava abhavan jantu nam ragni karhichit.
Hare.
Nadayo vyadaya klesha daiva bhutatma hetava
अजातशत्रव अभवान् जन्तूनां राज्ञी कर्हिचित्.
Hari Hari. Okay, so let's read the word for word. Na, never. Adaya, anxieties. Vyadaya, diseases. Kleshaha, trouble due to excessive heat and cold. This is a nice compound word. Daiva, Bhuta, Atma, all due to the body, supernatural power, and other living beings. Hetavaha, due to the cause of. Ajata Shatra, unto one who has no enemy. Abhavan, happened. Jantunam, of the living beings. Ragni, unto the king. Kadhichit, at any time. The translation and the purport are given by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Because of the kings having no enemy, the living beings were not at any time disturbed by mental agonies, diseases, or excessive heat or cold. Purport. To be non-violent to human beings and to be a killer or enemy of the poor animals is Satan's philosophy. In this age, there is enmity toward poor animals, and therefore the poor creatures are always anxious. The reaction of the poor animals is being forced on human society. And therefore, there is always the strain of cold or hot war between men, individually, collectively, or nationally. At the time of Maharaj Yudhishthir, there were no different nations, although there were different subordinate states. The whole world was united, and the supreme head, being a trained king like Yudhishthira, kept all the inhabitants free from anxiety, diseases, and excessive heat and cold. They were not only economically well-to-do, but also physically fit and undisturbed by supernatural power, by enmity, and from other living beings, and by disturbance of bodily and mental agonies. There is a proverb in Bengali that a bad king spoils the kingdom and a bad housewife spoils the family. This truth is applicable here also. Because the king was pious and obedient to the Lord and sages, because he was no one's enemy, and because he was a recognized agent of the Lord and therefore protected by him, all the citizens under the king's protection were, so to speak, directly protected by the Lord and his authorized agents. Unless one is pious and recognized by the Lord, he cannot make others happy who are under his care. There is full cooperation between man and God and man and nature, and this conscious cooperation between man and God and man and nature, as exemplified by King Yudhishthir, can bring about happiness, peace, and prosperity in the world. This attitude of exploiting one another, the custom of the day, will only bring misery. Nadhayo vyadaya klesha daiva bhutatma hetava ajata shatro bhavan jantunam ragyikarhijit. Because of the kings having no enemy, the living beings were not at any time disturbed by mental agonies, diseases, or excessive heat or cold. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapatantikam Katanchana smrite yasmin dushkaram sukaram bhavet. Vismrite viparitam syat. Shri Chaitanyam namamitam. Shri Chaitanya namamitam. Vanchakalpa tarubhyascha. Kripa sindhubhyaiva cha. Patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda. Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. I was born in the darkest ignorance, but my spiritual teachers are opening my eyes with the torchlight of knowledge. I offer them my respectful obeisances. When will Rupa Goswami Prabhupada, who has established on earth the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, grant me shelter under his lotus feet? Things that are very difficult to do become easy to execute if one somehow or other simply remembers Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But if one does not remember him, even easy things become very difficult. To this Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, I offer my respectful obeisances. All glories to the devotees of the Lord. What stands out in the verse is that Shri Yudhishthira Maharaj is not an enemy. Because the king's having no enemy. Ajata Shatro. Sri Krishna describes himself also as having no enemies, or by having equanimity toward all living beings. It's a point that he brings up a lot in the Bhagavad Gita. He says that anyone who's a devotee of him also develops that similar quality. Kind of by osmosis. When you spend time with someone, you develop their qualities. And one quality that Krishna has is that he sees everyone equally. The famous Samadarshina verse, where the learned sage sees with equality, regardless of whatever body someone's in, he sees the same quality of soul. Elsewhere, Krishna says that when he's describing the process of self-realization, Krishna says, at some point, you'll know that simply everyone belongs to me, or that everyone's mine. And that's the culmination of our knowledge, and obviously we're included in that category of everyone. And so the culmination of knowledge is to see that everything belongs to God. And there's so many ways of saying that. The Vedanta Sutra begins with Janmadhya Syayataha. Everything emanates from that source of all existence. Another way to say that is that everything belongs to the source of existence. So Maharaj Yudhishthira, being an individual who's spent a lot of time with Krishna, not only because he's in the category of devotee, that he has a high degree of self-realization by virtue of his own cultivation of knowledge, by his own practice of virtue, but also because he was born in the family of Sri Krishna. So he's, one could say, even though there's no internal or external for Krishna, one could say that Yudhishthira Maharaj has an internal love for God and an external familiar love for God as well. So he's a devotee in every respect. And so because of this, he also has no enemies. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that whatever actions like a reputable person performs, or whatever actions a person that has high status in society performs, naturally everyone else follows. And this is for a lot of reasons. One very easy reason is because we're very superficial and we see hierarchy. We see that, there's billions of people that are in the low class. And so that's not very rare to be low class. It's easy to be low class in this world, so we don't give a lot of value to it. But what is rare is to have a person become distinguished in society. So naturally, things that are very rare are very valuable. We think that they're important. And so people that are positioned above us in society, we see, well, what can we get from them so we can, maybe not be so common. I want to be rare also. I want to be valuable. And in the material world, scarcity is, the determiner of value. So Yudhishthira Maharaj, the chapter actually begins with, I think, Shaunaka Rishi's inquiry. Sutta. Yeah, Shaunaka Rishi is asking, okay, so what happened after the battle of Kurukshetra? How did Maharaj Yudhishthira rule the world? Certainly he didn't do it with unbridled senses. I mean, we can see that sometimes there's some morality that's upheld in a difficult situation. Like if you're studying for a test, you may be extra austere, like you'll sleep very little, or you'll, eat whatever, you'll eat things to stay awake, and you may practice like a certain type of life. But once you pass the test, you relax. It's vacation time. It's time to party. But we can see that Maharaj Yudhishthira was simple. A Vaishnava doesn't have duplicity, or doesn't have two manners of behaving, or just behave religiously when you want to accomplish some kind of goal, and then once you've acquired your goal, or one of your purusharthas, you now behave irreligiously, or now that you have what you want, you behave however. Yudhishthira Maharaj was thorough, and he was his intelligence was not many branched. It was single-mindedly focused. So however he was behaving on the platform in the battlefield of Kurukshetra is how he behaved as a king, which is with self-restraint, with honesty, with virtue and integrity. And so it's natural that would trickle down into the rest of society. We're definitely an influence of those that are above us. We're immediately we're influenced by our parents, how our parents were with us. Like my mom took me out to play a lot in the forest, and so I have an affinity for walking outside. She forced me to eat my green vegetables, and so I guess for a while I didn't like green vegetables, but I at least have some knowledge of the importance of that before meeting Krishna's devotees and seeing the perfection of green vegetables. Not that she didn't do them perfectly, of course, for the record. But so I behave a lot like my mother and my father, and I don't really ask if it's right or wrong, but they're in a very rare position. So automatically I just take it for granted that however they're behaving is the right way to behave. No one can argue with their parents until a certain age. And so, their rule is pretty much unchallenged. Then we begin to act a little like our friends, because they give us an example. And ultimately, we act like the people that are on television. We act like people that are musicians. I mean, they have access, almost unrestricted access to the airspace. So right now we're acting like an amalgamation or a conglomerate of everything that we see out in the world. We should have a parenthetical note just to remind us, in case our faith is sometimes waning. We should remind ourselves of the potency of spiritual personalities, that they don't have unbridled dominion over the airwaves, but look at what we're doing at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday, and take a look at what we're doing throughout our lives, and take a look at the vows that we've made to Guru and to Vaishnavas. And it's pretty fantastic that, at least for a lot of Westerners who weren't raised in the culture of piety, that we would have such an ability to do these things shows the potency of the devotee, shows the potency of the Bhagavatam. We all recited the Bhagavatam verse today and heard each other say it. And even though we don't know the potency of the mantra, it still takes effect. It's like medicine. We don't need to know how amazing Srila Prabhupada and Yudhishthira Maharaj and Krishna are right now for the potency, for who they are to have an effect on our lives. Of course, we will come to know to some degree, to our capacity to understanding later, but how amazing is it that I didn't grow up listening to Bhagavatam. I didn't grow up, knowing that Krishna is the name of the Supreme Person. I didn't know that there were such amazing kings like Ramachandra or Yudhishthir or Parikshit Maharaj. But just by hearing of them so little, percentage-wise in my life, just hearing about them so little, like the consciousness is attracted. The consciousness is captured in a sense. Rupa Goswami advises us to, if we want to continue our material lives, to avoid that person who's standing on the banks of the Jamuna in a threefold bending pose with his lips, with his flute brought to his lips. And that's certainly happening, we're being attracted somehow. So returning to the quality of not violence, Srila Prabhupada begins by saying that to practice non-violence to humans, but to practice violence to animals is Satan's philosophy. So that mentality is a direct contradiction to the mentality of equanimity. So it's seeing that only things that are like me are valuable. Only souls that are in human bodies are worth being kind or paying lip service to or being diplomatic with. But anyone in another body is not really valuable. I've mentioned before that my godbrother, he had before he was even following spiritual principles, he began to practice veganism for this point. He, just through logic, he realized that he wasn't having good relationships with people, but he wanted to have good relationships with people, particularly, with his partner, with his parents. And he thought to himself that human beings are, let's say, at a 100 level complexity. There's a certain degree of complexity. And animals are maybe at a 5 or 10 or 15 level complexity. And so he said, how am I going to know how to interact with human beings well if I don't give respect to such a simple level of complexity? Or in other words, if you can't solve a 1 + 1 problem, how will you solve a 5 cubed over 23 negative exponent 1 problem? So this is an interesting way to look at it. It's not necessarily the way that the Bhagavad Gita recommends. The Bhagavad Gita recommends, as a principle, look at everyone as belonging to God. But this is very logical to see that. So what to speak of Krishna? How will we have a good relationship with Krishna if we can't appreciate the simplicity of Krishna? If we can't appreciate, the simplicity of animals or of souls in animal bodies, if we can't appreciate the very fine details of Krishna's world, because that is all occurring according to his desire too. How I'm manifesting my consciousness and how a tree is manifesting its consciousness and a dog is manifesting its consciousness, all of that are expressions of Krishna's will and Krishna's desire. And if I'm preferring one aspect of Krishna's desire over another one, it's simply an expression of my egoism. But to prefer and to value and to honor other expressions of Krishna's will, that's Krishna consciousness, at least according to Krishna's opinion, that those who value as a principle everyone as belonging to God, those are Krishna conscious individuals. In this age, there is enmity toward poor animals, and therefore the poor creatures are always anxious. The reaction of the poor animals is always being forced on human society. We're now 2 years into a pandemic, and personally, I'm tired of speaking about it also and hearing, because there's really not new information, but it's worth considering as devotees, and we should consider why things happen, not only, how to stop it, but also why. Ultimately, Krishna consciousness is seen as the panacea for all our material problems because it brings your consciousness outside of the material world. It brings the consciousness to the shelter of, the devotees, and to the shelter of spiritual activities, and to the shelter of Krishna's preoccupations. So we don't talk about how the pandemic began, but without putting a finger on everything, we can see that for the most part, humanity is not living within harmony of God's laws. So it stands to reason that the rest of our lives would be a reaction of that disharmony. How can we expect to have any peace in the world, even within our small assembly of devotees within the world? We're living within a world, and we're not. Maybe my house is Vrindavan. Srila Vishwanatha Chakravarti Thakur said that, any house that the Srimad Bhagavatam is in, that should be considered Vrindavan. Or any place where Tulsi Maharani is grown, that should be seen as the spiritual world, since these entities don't live apart from the spiritual world. But what is my ability to take shelter of them? So, I'll admit in front of all of you that for the most part, I take shelter of my body. I take shelter of my identification as a male, as living in the United States, as living in the world, in the Milky Way. And so that's why Mercury retrograde still affects me. I'm not always under the shelter of the Goloka Vrindavan planet. So very small, gravitational fields affect me. So even if it's for a selfish interest, we should be interested in introducing other people to Krishna, because, we won't be happy, but neither will they, without knowing about our relationship to God. We're, the president of the United States and the president of most countries is eating meat. The president of most countries, or the ruler of most countries, is, drinking to let loose, or, smoking, or not caring of whether or not their citizens are practicing these activities that are detrimental to the focus of consciousness. I won't even say it in a yogic sense, but it's detrimental to the consciousness of self. It's really hard to know who you are when you're not thinking about it ever. And how can you do something that makes you happy if you don't know who you are? How can anything that we're doing make us happy if we don't think about what it is that makes me really happy, or if we don't learn to practice things that are spiritual in nature? In the same way that our activities are illuminated by intelligence, the activities of society are illuminated by an administrative head. So I guess this is the promise of what Krishna consciousness can bring to the world. It can, among us, maybe, there is a child that will, at some point run for office, and it'll be an individual that has known to offer obeisances to all living beings, has offered obeisances to cows, and hasn't lost their consciousness even for a moment of, some kind of intoxication, and it can really do good for the world. Or even before that, because maybe people don't care about, presidents, that there will be some actor, there will be some actor that, when they receive an Oscar, they thank Krishna. Or, like there already have been politicians that, they swear oath under the Bhagavad Gita, as individuals that when they go party, or, like a CEO that when they go party, that they don't celebrate by opening champagne, but they, celebrate by offering dandavats to everyone who helped them in the venture, or by, openly distributing prasad to everyone. So regardless of what our service is, like we're always doing service. I was speaking to someone the other day who said that she wished that her service was more overt, that it was more obvious that she was doing service. But, we both remembered that, Srila Prabhupada was working in pharmaceuticals for years. And he wasn't overtly, he didn't call it like, Vaikuntha Pharmaceuticals. He didn't call it, spiritual sky balm. even though his name was already spiritual. But Srila Prabhupada, just in interacting with society, was acting with that vision of like, Samadarshina, of everyone deserves to know about God. Everyone deserves to know about Krishna. And even if they're not interested in knowing, I can still behave that way. In a sense, that's harder. In a sense, it's very easy to speak on these matters when the devotees invite you. I constantly think about and talk about how the opportunity to give Bhagavatam class or to speak in front of you is a blessing for me, and an opportunity to have service at the Bhakti Center is a blessing for me, because if it wasn't for the opportunities that Krishna is giving me to do something for the devotees, the only thing I would be asked to do by society is nonsense. I was speaking with a devotee yesterday, like this is an opportunity that Krishna is giving us to bring our devotional service inward. When I was living as a brahmachari, I was told what time to wake up. I was told at what time to go to bed. When you go to the temple, you're told by the temple authorities, this is what you can do. But when we're at our house, all we have to rely on is our vow to Guru. So in a sense, we only have ourselves to rely on, how we can turn something spiritual, because our house isn't absolutely spiritual in the way that the temple is absolutely spiritual. I mean, Nitai Satchidananda lived there, and Nitai Chaitanya live over there, and they're being adored in a regular way, and the reality of all the devotees offering their blessings and seeing them. Indradyumna Swami, I don't know the Sanskrit, but he constantly quotes, "My dear Lord, you are not metal or wood. You are directly the son of Nanda Maharaj." So all the devotees, like invoking the presence of the deity in that way, look, of course Krishna reciprocates. So there's a spiritual reality to the temple that may not be so present in our house. So it behooves us, or the onus or the responsibility falls on us of how we can spiritualize our activity. Of course, we can offer prasad at the altar, but are we also thinking about Krishna's enjoyment while we're cooking? Are we also thinking about what Krishna likes when we're shopping for boga? Or when we wake up, when we woke up in the ashram, the first thing we do is offer dandavats. The first thing we do is put our head to the floor. And some devotees that have kids that are very young kids may not have the opportunity to do that. If you're like sleeping on your arm, so maybe you can offer dandavat, but the idea is that we have a lot of responsibility. We're not living in a world of rights where we constantly question what our rights are, but we have to wonder what our responsibility is. And this is so difficult. Personally speaking, my responsibilities are alive when I'm around the devotees. That's when I'm most aware of what my responsibilities are. But what's nice about Prabhupada's program of having Bhagavatam class, of reading Gita every night, of chanting your rounds, is that it does bring you in contact with Krishna's world. So it becomes easier to remember what responsibilities are. When we read about Yudhishthira Maharaj not having enemies, it's so attractive to us, and we might wonder, how can I not be an enemy? And obviously the way is to be a devotee. To everyone that you look at, wonder. Narada Muni said that if you can master these three relationships, you'll have perfect relationships throughout, which is, if there's somebody less fortunate than you, that knows less than you should develop the attitude of giving knowledge. If there's somebody that knows as much as you or is as fortunate as you should develop friendship with them. If there's someone that knows more than you should develop the quality of service to them, of rendering some kind of practical service. Now, technically, all three of these are service. You're serving someone by giving them knowledge. You're serving someone by being a good friend and by listening to them and by being empathetic. And you're being a servant by helping someone else. So you're always a servant. But if we can find out the perfect ways to serve, then everything will be perfect. So technically, those people that are later in the Bhagavatam, spoiler alert, Parikshit Maharaj is going to meet the personality of Kali. And he's going to ask a very interesting question to the Dharma. He's going to ask Dharma, who has done this to you? Who did this to you? And Dharma is going to refuse to answer. And in his purport, Prabhupada is going to say, and this is for anyone who's interested, 1:17-19, in the Bhagavad Gita 6:5, also it is confirmed that by one's mind, freed from material affection, one can deliver himself from the sufferings of material pangs. So one should not entangle oneself in matter by the mind's material affections. Thus, by one's own mind is one's friend or enemy in one's material happiness and distress. Sorry. Thus, one's own mind is one's friend or enemy in one's material happiness and distress. In another purport, Prabhupada explains that if the personality of Godhead accused Kali, oh, that's the personality right there, the personality of religion would have been implicated in the material modes of nature. So they technically would have become part of the problem. This is a really subtle point to understand, but it's one of my favorite points. I remember that was when I began to read the Bhagavatam again, this was the verse that affected me first out of all the other verses, because it said something really profound, that the material world does not influence me outside. The Bhagavad Gita explains that I have a sphere, the Kshetragya, or the knower of the field, is conscious of their own field. Only Paramatma is directly aware of other fields. So I am only aware of those things which actually, I become conscious of. So if someone else is my enemy, it could be for two reasons. It could be one, because I'm not a devotee and someone else is talking about Krishna, and that upsets me because it's influencing my lax attitude of just doing whatever I want in the world. But let's say for this example that I am a devotee, or that I'm trying, and that someone else is my enemy because they're interfering with my service, or they're speaking about me, or they're saying words, or they're my enemy because I feel like I have to please them. I feel like I'm so upset that I try so hard to look good for you, and so you're my enemy in a sense. Now, if we bring that consciousness inward, if we meditate on that, it's at the enemy is not actually outside. It's not actually that person. It's the fact that I chose to think about them. And we could argue, say, no, Prabhu, trust me, this person is actually making the world a worse place. But then I could argue again and say, but the whole world is Krishna's energy. I'm not arguing this. Prabhupada argues in one of his purports. He says that the devotee sees that everything is happening according to Krishna. Sarva karana karanam. He's the cause of all causes. So you could say it's Krishna's will that person be there. But I could argue, is it Krishna's will that you would be upset by it? Because in Vrindavan, everyone's working together. In the spiritual world, is full of variety. And there's, one devotee that thinks Krishna will be pleased if I smile at him, and another devotee thinks Krishna will be pleased if I ignore him. But they don't waste time debating. They just do their service, and then Krishna interacts, and they see what happens. And, amazingly, Krishna didn't lie, and he says he reciprocates with everyone. So Krishna is pleased by both, which is amazing. So because Krishna's not looking for the external thing. Krishna ate Viduri's banana peels. He's not looking for the external thing. Krishna's looking for the quality, for bhakti. And bhakti is not stereotyped. At least this is what the devotees say. So if I bring internally that other attitude that I'm seeing, it's actually not the person that I'm thinking about. It's the modes of nature that I'm thinking about. And that obsession with the modes of nature, be it goodness, passion, or ignorance, makes it impossible for me to practice. We can only practice on the Brahma Bhuta Prasanatma, na shochati na kankshati, sama sarveshu bhuteshu mad bhaktim labate param. So only on the platform of not hankering or desiring. I don't care if that other person approves of me, and I don't lament when they don't. We're not looking for external positions anymore. We're not looking for a position in this material world, because that position relies on relative value. You're only valuable if you're in a good position, and you're not valuable if you're not in a good position. But in Krishna's world, you're already valuable. You're already important because you belong to him. And you can do something. Ahaitu ki apratihata. This verse also uses that word, hetu. Hetu means cause. What did he say? Daiva bhutatma hetava. Not disturbed by mental agonies, diseases, or excessive heat or cold. So how can you avoid the causes of the material world is by realizing that it's not caused by the material world. It's caused by Krishna. So you're not interacting with the relativities of the material world. You're acting on the absolute grace of Krishna. Even if I die, what a blessing it is that I die. So I don't have to deal with like this particular configuration of mind and body anymore. And I hope that my chanting will put me in a better body that makes it easier for me to practice devotional service. So even, and if I get robbed, what a blessing. I'm obsessed with money all the time. And Krishna shows me that it can be gotten rid of. Or if someone doesn't like me, what a blessing. And Krishna shows me that I actually have a relationship with the deities and not with these. Of course, I have an eternal relationship with all of you, but I don't have an absolute relationship with all of you. My absolute relationship is with God. And from that relationship, I have a relationship with all of you. So we can transform the world that way. And that's what's special about the jiva. The jiva, because it belongs to Krishna, is allowed to return the material world back to God. Prabhupada said once, actually, the whole world is spiritual. The only thing that's material is that we think it belongs to us. So I can return that. I can return my lamentation. I mean, this is something that a devotee told me yesterday, and I'm still working on it, actually. But we not only offer a beautiful apple to Krishna or a beautiful sabji or khichdi, we can also offer, and this is difficult, we can also offer our confusion. Actually, Narottam Das Thakur says in his Sri Prema Chandrika, I can't quote it directly, but he says, I will engage my lust in only desiring you, Krishna. And I will engage my confusion when I don't achieve my desired goal in being confused about why I didn't achieve you. And so Narottam Das Thakur is saying how everything he'll spiritualize. It doesn't matter. And so we're allowed to do that too. Our Prabhupada told us that the proper application of anger is how Sri Hanuman used it, right? He got angry when the devotees were upset. So, or when the devotees were mistreated, when Sri Sita was mistreated. So, Yudhishthira Maharaj is our king. Actually, in the spiritual world, Nanda Maharaj is our king. Nanda Maharaj and Jashoda Mai, they are our rulers. And, how they behave in the spiritual world that's our example. Or how Yudhishthira Maharaj behaves. I mean, we're all subjects of that spiritual world. And so somebody is our ruler. Wherever in the spiritual world you see yourself, that's your king, not this democratically elected person that's really in position, what is it? A puppet head or a figurehead position. Who are real rulers are saintly people. And Srila Prabhupada and our Guru Janas and all the Vaishnavas. And I got carried away on that point, but we're allowed to return the spiritual world, the material world to Krishna. Let's see. This will help us have full cooperation. This is recommended in all the scriptures that we put ourselves in the service of people who know what they're doing. I'm trying to put myself in the service of people that know what they're doing by, the external formalities of reciting those prayers. I don't know what they all mean, but I know that if I do have faith that if I remember Mahaprabhu, things will be easier for me. And I do know that I'm grateful to my Guru Maharaj for giving me a service. And I'm grateful to all of you for giving me the service. So the more that I can remember that, the easier that my life will become. Because you knew who you were putting in service. You know that you're putting somebody that's, maybe not qualified in service, but my position isn't necessarily to be qualified. My position is simply to serve. So I can see the world a little clearer when I remember all of you. I suppose so. That's what we're doing. That's what we're doing here, trying to remember Yudhishthira Maharaj's position as a king, trying to see how he ruled and see, is there a way that I can rule my body that way? Can I rule my house that way? Can I rule my house as a representative of Krishna? Can I remember that, can I create the same kind of dynamic in my house? That I'm related to Krishna, I also have a position in the material world. Yudhishthira Maharaj is related to Krishna, he has a position in the material world. He offers everything back to God. So we're trying to recreate the spiritual world here, actually. I mean, in another sense, we're trying to let the spiritual world expand. So that's just a question of calming the ego down by repeating a lot of Krishna and Hari Katha. I think I've gone over my time. I surrender my remaining time to the Assembly of Vaishnavas. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dhanavad Pranam, Jai Srila Prabhupada. Thank you so much. You always narrate, very nicely, Prabhu. Thank you so much for the very, very sweet narrations. I have joined very late, Prabhu, so I missed most of your lecture, but I hope I'll listen to the recording. But one thing, finally, I like the point where you have mentioned that our relationship with the absolute truth is very, very important. And our other relationships are depending on our relationship with the absolute truth. So that makes really sense, Prabhu. If our relationship with the Supreme Lord is, strong and very, very, determined and in a proper way, then automatically our relationship with other devotees and other people would be really harmonized, right? So that point I totally like, Prabhu. And finally, you have given a conclusion very nicely that, how Yudhishthira Maharaj ruled the kingdom, we have to rule our body in the same way. So I got that point, Prabhu. Very, very, I don't know how to apply this in practical life, but Prabhu, thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji. It's so good to hear from you. I think that this is a good example. Like, more than any other devotee I know, you have a capacity for listening and for reflective listening that's like beyond what I've known anyone else to be able to do. You really bring knowledge inward and you assimilate it. And so this is a good example of, if it relied on just me, I would get to hear from you often, but I only get to hear from you when it's around Bhagavatam. See, so like our relationship only exists around Bhagavatam, around the assembly of the devotees. This is an example of the truth of that.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thank you so much for your association, Prabhu. We are missing your association in Punya Sharanam evening reading for a very long time. So at least this is a wonderful opportunity to associate with you. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhu, for the nice lecture. Does anybody else want to have questions or comments?
Hey Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much. It was really amazing the way you put it about how we are indirectly connected, in the sense that we are only connected through Krishna. That's in me really amazing. And the way you've talked about spiritualizing the parts of our life so that it helps in establishing or developing that relation with Krishna. That's also amazing. Thank you so much, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Okay, think it's about to be 9. So thank you, Danaraja Prabhu, for taking your valuable time to speak on Bhagavatam and making us all fortunate by hearing it again. Thank you all, dear devotees, for joining. Really appreciate how, like Danaraja Prabhu was saying, so many different things one could do on Sunday morning, but to join consistently is demonstrating our intent to Krishna as well. Thank you very much. So